It was 6:45 in the morning, the kind of morning where the air is still cool, the street is quiet, and the only sound you hear is the distant hum of a tow truck engine. That hum was music to my ears. From my front porch, I watched as the bright yellow tow truck slowly reversed toward a shiny pearl-white luxury SUV parked in front of the clubhouse. It wasn't just any SUV. No, this was Karen's pride and joy, the one she bragged about at every HOA meeting, the one she polished every Sunday while gossiping with other neighbors about how some people just don't take care of their property. The driver hopped out, all business, and started unhooking chains from the back of his truck. The metal clinked loudly in the morning silence, almost like the countdown to a grand finale. And then, the front door of Karen's house flew open. She came storming out in her bathrobe, hair sticking out in 1,000 directions, slippers flapping against the driveway as she half ran, half waddled toward the truck. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, pointing wildly at the driver. The tow truck guy barely looked up. "Ma'am, your vehicle is parked in a no parking zone. I've got an order to remove it." Karen's voice cracked. No. That's my car. I'm on the HOA board. You can't do this to me." She clutched her robe tighter like she was being robbed. I just sipped my coffee. From my spot on the porch, I had the perfect view, the tow truck winch pulling the front tires of her SUV off the ground, the panic in her voice rising with every inch. She kept looking around for support, waving toward the houses like the neighbors were going to rally to her rescue. But windows stayed shut. Curtains didn't even twitch. Nobody was coming. "Sir, if you take my car, I will have your company banned from this neighborhood," she threatened. The driver smirked. "Talk to your property manager, ma'am." He secured the SUV, climbed back into the cab, and with one smooth motion, the truck started rolling forward, taking her precious car with it. Karen's voice cracked again, this time higher, more desperate. "Stop. You don't know who you're dealing with." Oh, but I did know who I was dealing with. And she didn't know yet, but this wasn't just about a parking violation. This was personal. This was revenge for the deep, jagged scratch she had carved into the side of my brand new SUV just days before. As the tow truck disappeared around the corner, her screaming echoing into the distance, I took one last slow sip of coffee and smiled to myself. "You started this, Karen," I muttered under my breath, "and you messed with the wrong neighbor." But to understand how we got here, how a smug HOA queen ended up watching her prized possession get dragged away, we need to rewind to the beginning. 2 weeks earlier, I was standing in my driveway, still in that new car honeymoon phase, admiring my dream purchase. A 2024 midnight black SUV, sleek body lines, chrome accents, leather interior so fresh it still had that factory smell. Every time the sun hit the hood, it shimmered like glass. This wasn't just a vehicle to me. This was a statement. I'd worked years to afford something like this. Saved, planned, and finally signed the papers just days before. It was the kind of car that made you want to walk past your window every hour just to catch a glimpse of it sitting there. And in a perfect world, I would have just enjoyed it in peace. But I don't live in a perfect world. I live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. And worse, I live 3 houses down from Karen. Now, if you've never lived near someone like her, let me paint you a picture. She's the type who walks around with a clipboard, not because she's working, but because she likes to look like she's working. The type who introduces herself as on the board within 30 seconds of meeting you. The type who has binoculars on her porch for bird watching, but somehow always knows when you bring your trash bins out 3 minutes late. That morning, as I wiped a tiny, invisible speck off the hood, I felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. I glanced up and sure enough, there she was, standing on her front lawn, arms crossed, eyes locked on my SUV. At first, I thought maybe she was just admiring it. Who wouldn't? But then, she tilted her head and pursed her lips in that disapproving way people do right before they say something unnecessary. She walked across the street with that slow, deliberate Karen pace, like every step was part of an intimidation tactic. "New car?" she asked, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Yeah," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Just picked it up last week." She took a long, slow look at it, then leaned slightly closer as if to inspect a flaw that wasn't there. "You know, she began, "SUVs like this don't really fit the aesthetic of our neighborhood. The HOA prefers more modest vehicles. Keeps the community uniform." I raised an eyebrow. Uniform? You mean like everyone driving the same boring silver sedan? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's not about boring, it's about standards. You might want to check the community guidelines before you get too comfortable parking that here." I chuckled, partly because I thought she was joking, partly because I wanted to avoid starting a pointless argument. "Well, the car's staying. Have a good day, Karen." As I walked back toward my house, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. That was the first sign. The first little spark of tension. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just a casual comment. This was the opening move in a petty little war, one I hadn't asked for, but one I was definitely going to win. It started small. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just normal neighborhood life. But deep down, I knew Karen was testing me. 3 days after our aesthetic conversation, I woke up to find my garbage can tipped over in the middle of the street. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, until I realized the lid was placed carefully beside it, not blown off. My trash bags had been neatly, almost surgically, torn open, with just enough debris scattered to make it look messy. I cleaned it up, shook my head, and let it go. But then, the following morning, I opened my mailbox to find a crisp, white envelope from the HOA. Inside, a formal reminder notice stating that I was in violation of Section 4.3, driveway usage. Apparently, I wasn't supposed to park commercial-looking vehicles in my driveway. Commercial-looking? My SUV was straight out of the showroom. No stickers, no racks, nothing. I laughed out loud. I figured it was just some automated letter. That is, until I saw the signature at the bottom. Submitted by Karen L., HOA board member. That's when it clicked. This wasn't random. This was her. She'd gone from making snide comments to filing official complaints, and she was just warming up. Over the next week, the petty harassment became creative. Twice, I found small piles of gravel just behind my SUV's rear tires. Not enough to damage anything, but enough to make me wonder. My driveway mysteriously had chalk marks along the edge, like someone was measuring how far onto the sidewalk I was parked. And then there was the mistaken package delivery. A box left on my porch with Karen's name on it, containing nothing but old newspapers. When I tried to return it, she said, "Oh, must have been a mix-up," with the fakest smile I'd ever seen. It wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about control. Karen didn't like that I wasn't bending to her unwritten rules, and now she was trying to push me until I either moved the SUV or snapped. I decided to do neither. Instead, I kept notes. Dates, times, photos. Because the more she pushed, the more I started thinking, if she wanted a game, I could play. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the next move she made. The one that turned this petty little back and forth into an all-out war. By this point, I'd stopped thinking of Karen as the neighbor who's a little nosy, and started seeing her as what she really was, a self-appointed neighborhood dictator with a clipboard and a vendetta. Every encounter with her felt calculated. Every glance from across the street carried that subtle message, "I'm watching you." And I was watching back. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the change in her routine. Normally, she'd make her daily inspection walks around the neighborhood in the mornings, cup of tea in one hand, phone in the other, peeking into everyone's yards like she was checking her investments. But now, she started walking past my driveway multiple times a day, always slowing down just enough to stare at the SUV. At first, I thought maybe she was just annoyed by it. But then I caught something that made my stomach tighten. On one of her passes, she leaned in slightly, pretending to tie her shoe, but her hand brushed the side of my car. Not a full-on touch, just the tips of her fingers grazing the paint like she was testing something. That night, I decided to park my car slightly closer to the garage, just to make it less accessible from the street. The very next morning, I woke up to another HOA envelope in my mailbox. This one claimed that parking too close to the structure was a safety hazard. Submitted by, you guessed it, Karen. It was getting comical. But then, the strange little coincidences started piling up. Incident 1. My motion sensor security light kept going off around 11 p.m. each night. When I checked the footage, all I saw was the faint silhouette of someone walking past my driveway, slow, deliberate steps. Incident 2. One morning I found a faint, almost invisible smudge across my rear bumper, not quite a scratch, but enough to make me wonder if someone had been leaning against the car. Incident 3. My neighbor 2 doors down casually mentioned, "Hey, I saw Karen taking pictures of your SUV yesterday." Something about documentation for the HOA. At this point I could feel it in my gut. She was building up to something. And sure enough, the day before it happened, I spotted her outside talking to another board member, pointing directly at my driveway, gesturing with her hands like she was measuring something in the air. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't just going to keep filing complaints. She was planning to make her own evidence. I didn't know exactly what she'd do, but the signs were all there. The lingering looks, the casual touches, the late-night walks. And then came Saturday morning. The day she finally crossed the line. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of morning that should have been peaceful. The air was crisp, birds were chirping, and I had my first hot cup of coffee in hand. I stepped outside, expecting to admire my SUV the way I always did, maybe even wipe down a few dust specks before heading out for errands. But the second I saw it, the coffee almost slipped out of my hand. There was a deep, angry scar etched into the midnight black paint, starting at the front headlight, slicing all the way down the passenger side, and stopping just before the taillight. It wasn't a careless scratch from a grocery cart or a child's bike. No, this was deliberate. Malicious. The kind of damage you only see when someone drags a key slowly, intentionally, enjoying every second of it. I froze for a moment, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Then the shock gave way to heat. A slow, burning rage started in my chest and spread through my veins. Thousands of dollars. On a car I'd owned for barely 2 weeks. On the car I'd worked years to afford. I heard it. From across the street came the unmistakable sound of a smug little chuckle. I turned my head, and there she was, Karen, leaning casually against her mailbox, coffee mug in hand, watching me like she was waiting for my reaction. I walked toward her, the kind of walk where you don't even realize your fists are clenched. "You wouldn't happen to know how this happened, would you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She tilted her head, pretending to think. Maybe someone around here just doesn't like flashy cars," she said with a smirk. "Or maybe," she sipped her coffee, "this neighborhood just isn't the right place for something like that." I stared at her for a long second, every fiber of me wanting to call her out right there, to accuse her, to scream. But she wanted that reaction. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could play the victim. So I did the opposite. I smiled. "Got it," I said quietly. "Thanks for the tip." And I turned, walked back to my driveway and pulled out my phone. Because in that moment, I made a decision. If she thought she could destroy my property and get away with it, she was about to learn the hard way that I don't just get even. I get creative. This wasn't going to be a complaint to the HOA. This wasn't going to be a police report. This was going to be personal revenge. And I already knew exactly where I was going to hit her. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I stood there next to my scratched SUV, phone still in my hand, pretending to scroll through messages while I cooled down. But my mind wasn't calm. Not even close. The rage was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, and every time I glanced at that jagged line across my car, it flared up again. Karen, of course, was still across the street, leaning on her mailbox like she owned the block. She had that self-satisfied look of someone who had just won a petty neighborhood battle, the kind of expression you want to wipe right off someone's face. I decided I wasn't going to let her walk away from this moment, thinking she'd scared me into silence. So I crossed the street. Her eyes narrowed slightly as I approached, but she didn't move. "Well," she said, feigning innocence, "I hope you called your insurance. Those scratches can be expensive." I stopped just a few feet from her and met her gaze. "You know, Karen, it's a funny thing. Cars can be fixed. But reputations? Those are harder to repair." She tilted her head, that smug smirk still plastered on her face. Is that supposed to be a threat? No, I said, keeping my tone calm. It's just a thought. See, when someone goes out of their way to make trouble for me, I tend to remember. And I tend to be very patient. Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. Well, patience is a virtue. I'm sure your little situation will be resolved eventually. Just remember, the HOA does have certain standards. And some people need reminders. That was it. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. I nodded slowly, turned to walk away, and that's when I saw it. Her car. It was parked just a few spaces down from the clubhouse. The pearl-white luxury SUV she doted on like it was her child. I'd seen it countless times, always gleaming from her obsessive washes, always parked just far enough from other cars to avoid door dings. But now I noticed something else. It was in a spot clearly marked with a bright yellow curb and a sign, "No overnight parking, tow zone." My mind started connecting the dots instantly. Karen had parked there overnight before. I'd seen it a handful of times, usually after she came back late from some HOA event or social gathering. But now, with my eyes wide open, I realized she was breaking the very rules she loved to enforce on everyone else. I didn't say a word to her about it, not yet. Instead, I let my face go neutral, even a little defeated, and just said, "Enjoy your weekend, Karen." I turned and walked back to my house, but inside, my brain was already spinning at 100 miles an hour. Because I had just found her weak spot. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the sweetest revenge is when you let someone trap themselves, and then you pull the trigger at exactly the right moment. By the time I closed my front door, my heart rate had slowed, but my focus had sharpened. That bright yellow parking, tow zone sign behind Karen's SUV was burned into my brain like a neon opportunity light. For days, she'd been trying to force me into a corner, harassing me with petty HOA complaints, littering my driveway, and finally, scratching my brand new SUV. She thought she was untouchable because she sat on the HOA board. But she wasn't untouchable. She was just careless. The best part? I didn't even need to bend the rules to get her. I could take her down using the same HOA laws she threw at everyone else. The irony was delicious. I went to my desk, pulled out the dusty HOA handbook I'd received when I moved in, and started flipping through it like a lawyer preparing for court. Sure enough, there it was, Section 5.2. Vehicles parked in prohibited zones are subject to immediate removal at the owner's expense. No prior warning required. I couldn't help but laugh. The very rule she probably helped write was about to bite her right back. Now, here's where the universe decided to gift me a little extra luck. I happen to run a small contracting business, which means I've worked with towing companies before. One in particular, Tony's Tow and Recovery, had been my go-to whenever my company trucks broke down. Tony and I weren't just business contacts, we were friends. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Tony," I said when he answered, "I've got a situation for you. Easy job, but extremely satisfying." He chuckled. "Sounds like my kind of work. What's the story?" HOA board member's SUV is parked in a tow-away zone. I want it gone, today. Can you handle it? He whistled. A board member? Man, you're trying to start a neighborhood war. I smiled to myself. Nah, just finishing one. We agreed on the details. He'd swing by early in the morning, before most neighbors were even awake, hook the vehicle, and be gone in minutes. No fuss, no delay. And best of all, perfectly legal. But I wasn't just going to have it towed. I wanted her to feel every second of that panic. So, the night before, I decided to make sure her SUV was parked in that forbidden spot again. Around 9 p.m., I stepped outside casually, pretending to take out the trash, and there it was, her pearl-white pride and joy sitting smugly in the tow zone. Perfect. I even took a few photos on my phone, just in case she tried to claim it wasn't there overnight. Time-stamped, crystal clear, irrefutable proof. By the time I went to bed, I felt lighter, like I had finally taken control of the game she'd been playing. She wanted to make me feel powerless. Tomorrow morning, she was going to learn exactly what it felt like. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to savor every second of what was about to happen. It was 6:15 a.m., the kind of still, quiet morning where the neighborhood is half asleep, the air is crisp, and even the birds haven't decided whether to start singing yet. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and settled into my front porch chair like it was my personal theater seat. From where I sat, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the clubhouse parking lot, and there it was. Karen's pearl-white SUV, gleaming in the soft morning light, parked illegally in that tow zone like it owned the place. At 6:25, I heard the faint rumble of a diesel engine in the distance. My lips curled into a grin. Here came Tony's truck. The massive yellow and black tow rig turned onto our street, moving slow and steady, its hazard lights blinking like an announcement. Today is the day. The sound of the engine was louder now, breaking the sleepy silence of the neighborhood. Tony spotted me instantly. He gave a little two-finger salute from the cab, and I nodded back. No words needed. We both knew the mission. The truck pulled up next to the clubhouse, and Tony hopped out in his work boots, moving with the efficiency of a man who's hooked up 1,000 cars before breakfast. He didn't even glance toward Karen's house. He went straight to the SUV, lowered the wheel lift, and started positioning it under the front tires. The metal clink of the chains echoed off the houses. To me, it was music. I could have just let this happen quietly. Karen might not have noticed until hours later when she walked outside and her car was gone. But no, that wasn't good enough. She needed to see it. She needed to feel the same gut punch I felt when I saw my scratch. So, as Tony was tightening the straps, I casually sent a mistaken text to her number, something harmless like, "Hey, you might want to check outside. Something's happening at the clubhouse." It took about 45 seconds. The front door across the street swung open, and there she was, in her robe, hair a mess, looking half asleep and annoyed. She glanced toward the clubhouse and froze. Her expression went from confusion to disbelief to absolute fury in under 3 seconds. She started power walking toward the truck, yelling, "What are you doing?" "That's my car." Tony didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, this vehicle is parked in a tollway zone. Order came from the HOA guidelines. You can take it up with them." Karen's voice shot up an octave. "I am the HO. You can't tow my car without warning." Tony just shrugged, still working the winch. "Says right here, no overnight parking. No warning required. Rules are rules." I nearly laughed out loud at that last part. Rules are rules, her favorite phrase now turned against her. The front wheels lifted off the ground, and she was practically vibrating with rage. "I'm calling the president of the board. I'm calling." The tow truck started moving forward slowly, her SUV now locked into its grip. Her voice got shriller, but the truck didn't stop. Tony just gave her a polite nod and drove off down the street. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee like I was watching the sunrise. She turned her fury toward me, her eyes narrowing. "You," she hissed. "Did you do this?" I just raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. "Have a great morning, Karen." The tow truck's rumble faded into the distance, but Karen's voice didn't. She was still standing there in the middle of the street, robe half open, hair like a bird's nest, muttering and huffing like she was about to combust. For a solid 10 seconds, she just stared down the road where her SUV had vanished, clutching her coffee mug in one hand like it might give her the strength to face the day. Then, she whipped around toward me. "You think this is funny?" she snapped, her voice cracking from the effort of trying to sound in control. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the steam curling lazily in the morning air. "I think rules are rules," I said, keeping my tone light but letting the words hang there just long enough for her to get the point. Her face flushed red, the kind of deep, blotchy red that only comes from embarrassment mixed with rage. She opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could, a neighbor 2 houses down stepped outside with his dog. He glanced at Karen, then at me, then said loud enough for both of us to hear, "Guess even board members aren't above the HOA rules, huh?" I swear, I almost spit out my coffee. Karen shot him a death glare and spun back toward her house, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. People walking their dogs slowed down to whisper. A jogger stopped to tie his shoe and, just happened, to ask what happened to Karen's car. And of course, I played it cool. "Oh, I think it was parked in the tow zone overnight," I'd say, feigning innocence. You know the policy, no exceptions. By 9 a.m., I could see her pacing inside her living room through the half-open blinds, phone glued to her ear. I imagined the conversation. First with the towing company, then with the HOA president, then with anyone who would listen to her version of the story. But here's the beautiful part. The rule was ironclad. No overnight parking in a tow zone, no warning required, owner pays the fees. Period. By noon, she must have gone to retrieve the SUV because she came back driving it, but the smugness was gone. Instead, she pulled into her driveway with a face like she'd just swallowed a lemon. She got out and slammed the door a little too hard, her eyes darting toward my house for just a split second before she disappeared inside. Later that afternoon, another neighbor, one of the quieter types, came over and knocked on my door. He smirked and said, "I heard about this morning. I've been waiting years for someone to give her a taste of her own medicine." Well played. I didn't confirm or deny. I just smiled and said, "Funny how things work out when you follow the rules." That night, the street was calm. No late-night pacing from Karen. No mysterious motion sensor activations. Just silence. And for the first time since I bought my SUV, I felt like the neighborhood was finally mine again. The days after the tow felt different. 4 months, I'd lived with that low-grade tension every time I pulled into my driveway, always wondering if Karen would be lurking behind her blinds, looking for some technicality to pin on me. But now, the air felt lighter, quieter. The first sign that things had shifted came on Monday morning. Usually, Karen strutted around the neighborhood like she was the mayor, stopping people mid-walk to remind them of the latest HOA rules or to comment on their lawn height. But that morning, she walked straight from her front door to her mailbox, eyes down, not a word to anyone. She didn't even look in my direction. By midweek, I started noticing other changes. Her SUV, once parked wherever she pleased, now sat neatly in her own driveway every night, backed in perfectly between the painted lines like she'd measured it. No more quick stops in the tow zone. No more pulling halfway into other people's spaces at community events. She was following the rules. Imagine that. And the neighborhood noticed. One evening, I was chatting with Greg from 2 doors down when he chuckled and said, "I've never seen Karen so quiet. You must have hit her where it hurts." I played dumb. "Oh, what makes you say that?" Greg smirked. "Let's just say people around here have long memories. The image of her standing in her robe while her car got hauled away? That's not going away anytime soon." Turns out, the moment had become local folklore. Someone even caught part of it on their doorbell camera. Karen waving her arms at the tow truck, and it made the rounds in our neighborhood group chat. No captions, no commentary, just the video. That was enough. By Friday, she'd gone full radio silence. No confrontations, no friendly reminders, no unexpected knocks on my door. When we did happen to cross paths, like in the grocery store parking lot, she gave me the tightest, fakest smile you've ever seen and kept walking. And here's the thing. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. The beauty of this kind of revenge is that it doesn't need follow-up. It sits there, quietly, like a framed picture on a wall, a permanent reminder that actions have consequences. Weeks later, I was washing my SUV in the driveway when Karen drove past. She slowed for just a second, looked at the freshly waxed paint glistening in the sun, and I swear there was a flicker of something in her face. Maybe regret, maybe resentment, maybe both. But she didn't say a word. And I knew right then, my victory wasn't just that she paid for a tow. My victory was that she'd never forget the day someone beat her at her own game. In the end, I didn't have to break a single rule. I just had to follow them better than she ever could.